Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Aditi Verma, student of MBA Semester 3rd of Rukmi Devi Institute of Advanced Studies, warmly welcome you to today's webinar on alternative sources of financing, organized by International Affairs Department of RTEC. Allow me to welcome Dr. Diana Morales Herrera. Madam is working.
Hello, guys. Good afternoon. Good morning for me. It's quite early for us. So thank you very much. Let me close this window. Otherwise, things are distracting. So thank you very much for having me. I was very happy when I got the invitation to be here with you to talk about my research, to tell you what we are doing here at Glasgow University. So before I start, and thank you to Richard for reaching me and for bringing me here with you today. So before I start talking about, I hope I can share my screen at some point. Is it possible? Is it? Yeah, I can share, right?
Thank you. So Adam is working as a faculty at the Adam Smith Business School, University of Glasgow, UK. Dr. Diana's area of interest includes banking and alternative sources of financing, financial regulation, access to financial services, financial stability, and climate change. Her 2 decades of professional experience has witnessed her engagement at the Mexican Banking and Securities Commission, Central Bank of Mexico, Bank for International Settlement, National Bank of Belgium, and University of Glasgow. She also has over a decade of experience in teaching international financial management, entrepreneurial finance, statistical analysis and methods, risk management, and financial derivatives. Dr. Diana has been instrumental in conducting various seminars and workshops at the IMF, Brazilian Ministry of Finance in Brasilia, Central Bank of Mexico in Mexico City, European Banking Center workshop in Tilburg, and Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond in Charlotte, USA. Madam is currently teaching at Adam Smith Business School, University of Glasgow, Scotland. We welcome you, Madam.
Thank you. That's a very long introduction of me.
And for sparing your valuable time for us. We are looking forward to an invaluable learning experience for the students. Now, I would like to request our session expert, Dr. Diana, to enlighten us all.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen that is not coming out for some reason. Is it okay if I cannot find my article here? Let me open it. Oh, now I find it. So can you see my screen now? It's a PDF document.
Yes, Dr. Diana, it's visible.
Okay, so the white mirror on the screen. Okay. Let me open this. View full screen. Here. Perfect. So thank you very much for the introduction. It was a very long introduction. So before I start talking about my research, you already heard a little bit of me. So let me just give you like the extra details that will help you to understand where all this is coming from. My research started several years ago after the bachelor. So let me tell you the beginning, and then we can move to the research. So as you heard, I work at the central bank. I have been traveling a lot with the last years. So originally I just came for a 1-year master, and then things just kept on rolling. And then I'm here at the University of Glasgow. I'm a researcher here. I arrived in 2019, but the research started many years ago when I was at the central bank. So I was working at the research unit, and my main task as a junior analyst was to analyze and track the indicators corresponding to the bank lending and alternative sources of financing granted to the non-financial private sector, meaning firms, households, but also mortgages. So by that time, I got to know like the different sources, I learned the different indicators, and I got very, very interested. So me coming to the PhD was kind of very natural because I was formed among PhD researchers and doctors from Ivy League university. So for me, it was very, very, very natural to come here. So one of the papers that I'm going to be presenting today is a working paper that I have with the Central Bank of Mexico. Actually, one of my co-authors is my original boss, the boss that I got when I was there. She is a very experienced policymaker. We have also the expertise of another very experienced policymaker. So it's three of us trying to help the firms on their access to credit. So with this idea in mind, while analyzing the different sources of financing, I came to the PhD and then I got very interested. So let's jump into my research. So you have been, you watched the news for sure when the COVID hit with all these crises as the lockdowns came. And you saw the news like, oh, this government, like Federal Reserve, is providing like subsidy for the firms so they can pay their employees. So they try to keep all those firms alive, right? And that was not the only the case of the United States. That happened here in the United Kingdom, happened in also the Netherlands. It happened around the world. So, but this is like a problem that is not a very recent problem. It has been going on for a long, long time, couple of decades already. So it's like the perennial conundrum, right? The firms try to get funding because they want to grow, but they simply just cannot get it. So probably some of you know, but in case you don't know, so let's talk about this a little bit like general so you get the big picture. So this research that I will be presenting today makes sense. So it's known that small firms are financially constrained, right? We know that. But we heard that it's in the news, it appears in the New York Times all the time, in the Financial Times, but why is this the case? Why are those firms specifically being affected by these constraints? So just so you get the idea, the literature regarding this issue is massive. So the main idea, I will like summarize years and years and decades of research in like one slide. So the idea is that there is this strong information asymmetry, right? So I am a bank, you are a firm, you would like to get some lending because you want to grow, you want the firm to grow faster. But because I don't know you, then I'm a bit blindsided, right? You cannot signal your quality as a borrower. Therefore, those frictions, those asymmetries in terms of information are going to be affecting this relationship, right? Your access to lending. So that's going to be happening, or that will lead to credit rationing. So I will be like more selective. I will just be giving money to the large firms, and I will just ignore you because I don't know you. And there are two main things behind this asymmetry that we have, right? So on the one hand, we have the adverse selection. I don't know the quality of you. I don't know if you are going to be a good borrower and you will be paying me back. I just cannot discriminate. Therefore, I will offer you the same loan with the same characteristics, the same amount, the same maturity, because I cannot distinguish between the borrowers. That's the problem of mine as a bank. On the other hand, we have the moral hazard problem, right? So I will give you the money, you will make decisions with that money, the loan that I will give you, but I don't know whether those decisions are good decisions because me, the bank, I cannot interfere on those decisions, right? You will be making the decisions. But since I don't know, for me, I'm a blindsided because I don't know if you will be paying me back. So that's the other part of the problem, right? The adverse selection and the moral hazard problem. So those two combined will generate this demand for credit exceeding the supply. So all of you will want to get the money, the lending, but since I have a little bit, I will just be selective. So many of you will not have it, and the ones that have it will face huge prices, right? High interest rates. Now, with this idea in mind, you might be thinking, okay, so it's like a matter of quality, right? We get to know each other, you know that I'm a good borrower, that I'm going to be paying you back. But there's another side of the story, which are like the characteristics of the loan. So on the one hand, we have the price elements, and the other hand is going to be the non-price elements. So for the case of the price elements, you are seeing the news at the moment, right? The Federal Reserve increased the interest rates. Here in the UK, the interest rates also increased. My landlord lost her flat because she couldn't pay the mortgage. So the flat is gone. And that is happening around the world. It's not only here, it's in Mexico, it's in Canada, it's in the Netherlands. People are simply cannot face the increment in the interest rate. So for the case of the small and medium-sized enterprises, that's a problem, right? If I get a loan, but simply you are charging me a huge interest rate and I just cannot pay it, then I will say, okay, thank you, but no, I simply cannot pay that. On the other hand, we have the collateral, right? The collateral can be very expensive. If you are a risky borrower, and that's my perception of you, then I will be asking you to pledge a massive collateral. And probably because you are a firm and you are small, and you just started operations, you don't have that amount of collateral because you are small, you are young, and also your future cash flows are kind of uncertain. Because of all of those things combined, I would say, oh no, I will not give you the money because you're too risky, and you will not give me my money back. So that's the other side of the problem, right? On the one side is like the relationships, is we don't know each other. On the other side is like the precautions that I will take to make sure my money comes back to me. So it's it moving, yes. But you might be thinking at this point, like, why do I care? I will go to work in a firm and at a multinational corporation. So it's that this problem is really not affecting me, right? Like those are micro and small enterprises that are pretty much is like the store in the corner. So why is that my problem? I'm completely exogenous to that issue. But here is the situation. So you have a small firm that is not getting access to lending. The small firm cannot hire more employees, probably will go into bankruptcy. Like a couple of employees, they spread, they find new jobs. But if you multiply this problem several times, it becomes a massive problem. And just so you have the idea of the magnitude of the problem, in Mexico, as well as in the United States, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Brussels, in China, and probably in your case as well, the small and micro enterprises account for 99.8% of the private sector businesses. So that's a massive problem. And you might be thinking, yeah, but those are many firms, but like, so what? I don't care. Those firms combined account or contribute to the output, the GDP, between like 50 and 60%. So it's like 50% of the output is coming from them. And also they contribute to the employment between 70 and 80%, which is pretty much at a national level, right? So it's kind of like 30% of the people work at multinational large firms, large corporations, and the rest of the people are in the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. So it's a massive problem, right? If those firms go into bankruptcy, there's unemployment and it gets crazy. So this is why it was very important for the banks to help them, because they have to survive, because the consequences of those firms going into default was massive. Now you saw what is happening around the world, right? So the problem with those firms, and we already talked about this, the fact that these firms don't have a sustainable financing on long term will have implications in terms of unemployment. So immediately unemployment is going to be triggered if this condition is not met. But also there's going to be inequality, and those two combined will generate a lack of public confidence. And this happened during COVID. This is not something I'm telling you a nice, cool story. This happened in COVID. You saw when the lockdowns started. It happened in the Netherlands. People went crazy. They didn't have the jobs. They had to feed their families. And then cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and the city in which I was living all those years, people went at night and they were like destroying the different supermarkets. It went really, really, really crazy. So this lack of public confidence is really, really important. It's happening in Russia at the moment, right? There's lack of public confidence. those all the internal insurrections. You don't want to have that if you are a government. So with these ideas in mind, and I was at the bank when the financial crisis started, so it was very, very interesting to see what was happening with the firms, with the different financial intermediaries. So you might be thinking, yeah, but Mexico was far away, was not affected. It was affected. It was really, really affected. And I will show you like some graphs in like 1 second, so you will see what was happening. So when all those changes, let me give you the setting so you know what is coming. When all the crisis hit, immediately all the policymakers around the world turned their eyes into the banking sector, and they started regulating and regulating and regulating, and more changes to the regulation. And when they were very, very busy and very focused on changing and like trying to control and avoid a new financial crisis, that simultaneously spur alternative sources of financing, right? If I am a firm and I need lending because I need my company to grow, I don't care if this bank lending is constrained and it's not giving me money. I have my demand and I will try to satisfy my demand. So I will turn my eyes and I will try to use alternative sources of financing. And that happened. Trade credit grew very, very, very fast and grew a lot. 1 second, I will show you a slide. So the problem with this, I presented this paper when I was in the job market at the central bank. So I have all the policymakers, the directors of the research unit, and they were like, come on, like, where did you get those graphs? That's your invention. And I was like, no, I got these graphs from the website, it's public data. And they were like, what? What is that? So those are the graphs that I'm going to be showing you. This is going to be showing you that this trade credit is growing a lot and it's becoming very, very big. But that's not the problem. The problem is the degree of interconnectedness that the different players have. We don't know, since trade credit is in general not monitored, not regulated. So the regulators are like having like some animal that is growing like crazy, having like crazy shapes, but they're just looking at the the bank lending, at the banking sector. That suppliers is like somewhere they're moving, growing, but no one knows. So just so you have an idea, these alternative sources of financing, such as like trade credit or shadow banking, which is another source that I study, can grow very fast and can become very dangerous. In the United States in 2009, there was one firm that was originally created to manufacture electrodomestics. You know, like tiny electrical gadgets that you will use in your house, like the iron. You will be thinking like, that's completely irrelevant. This company that was doing that grew so much that the Federal Reserve declared the company a systemically important entity, and now it's regulated as a bank. So you have more companies like this, and they are spread in the industry. So when I started checking my data, because I work with the data at the national level, I was like, whoa, like this guy is like gigantic. So every time I was checking, I'm like, oh my God, this is insane. No one knows. And I'm seeing this for the first time because my data is confidential. But it's like, I got the data from a public source, but no one knows this. So all these combined with the banks that they continues to be very cautious. And now we have Basel 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know how many Basels. It's very dangerous. It's a dangerous situation in which not only the firms, but the households are as well. So let me show you this graph. So this is the information. All these first graphs that I'm going to show you correspond to data from Mexico that's happening there at the moment. So the central bank has a survey. So on a quarterly basis, they ask the firms about their use of sources of financing, right? So in the horizontal axis, you can see all the dates. So this is a decade of answers for this survey. On the vertical axis, you have the percentage of firms that are using bank lending. Now, the graph is going to be updated soon for the new version of the paper, but look at this, is very interesting. At the beginning, when these data started to be collected, like the second quarter of 1999 and the beginning of 2000, you can see that the firms, and this graph corresponds to the large firms, the use of bank lending was still slightly higher than the use of alternative sources of financing. The graph that corresponds to did not use bank lending means they use other sources of financing. And you see, like, it was a little bit higher, but something happened, and then they started to grow apart. And you can see this line, right? It's going up, 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 up. And this one is going now down, right? You can see there is a negative trend. Now, what is very interesting, so I saw the graph and I was like, yes, the large firms are not using bank lending and are using alternative sources of financing. So what? I look at the same graph, but this time I did it for the medium-sized enterprises. And this line that corresponds to the use of bank lending shifted downwards. So it's at a level between 15 and 25%. Whereas the line that corresponds to the alternative sources of financing, the use shifted upwards. Of course, because it's the complement, right? So it shifted at this level between 75 and 85%. And I was like, let's look at the small firms, what is happening there. And I saw that this line that corresponds to the use of bank lending is below the 10%. What does that mean? The small firms are not using bank lending anymore. And the line that corresponds to the alternative sources of financing is above the 90%. And those are the firms that pretty much constitute the country. They are not using bank lending anymore. So the next question I got, like, okay, if the firms are not using bank lending, it's clear. What are they using? So I collected these data from the survey, and I found that these firms, so there is a breakdown of the different sources of financing, right? You have commercial banks, foreign banks, development banks. So those three constitute the line that you saw in the previous graph that corresponds to the bank lending. So the extra sources of financing that were in the line that is like that corresponds to the alternative sources is other liabilities, suppliers, other firms in corporation, and parent company. So what do I understand by suppliers? First, let's get the same definition so we are all on board. What I mean by suppliers is the credit that the suppliers will give to the firms in exchange for an anticipated delivery of inputs. So if you're the firm and I'm the supplier, I will give you the inputs and then you can pay me back later, like in 30, 60, 90 days, right? And then I'm cool with that. So if you look at the different sources of financing, you get to see that pretty much all the alternative sources of financing are here at a level of 10% or below, right? Kind of cluster around this percentage. But this line, the continuous solid line, corresponds to suppliers. And that one continues to increase and increase, whereas the line that corresponds to the bank lending, the commercial bank lending, goes down and down and down. This graph corresponds to the large firms. If you look at the medium-sized firms, you see that supplier is shifted upwards and commercial bank lending downwards. If you go at the small enterprises, the line of the suppliers is ridiculous. It's hitting the 100% in many cases. And the line that corresponds to the commercial bank lending is hitting 0. So I was like, okay, something is happening. Something seemed to happen like around these years, and then the trend just continue, right? So the firms are not using bank lending anymore. Then I was thinking, so this idea was in my head like for many years. So when I arrived to the PhD, I was like, I want to figure out what happened. What was the problem? With this idea in mind, I started my first paper. This one, my job market paper, is the one that I'm working with next with policymakers of the central bank. So the idea here is like, I want to understand what is happening, right? The title of the paper is a pass-through of bank lending to trade credit among firms. So the idea here, the first idea that came to my mind was like, okay, I think it was connected with the changes in the banking regulation. Something happened there, such that the banks were not given money anymore. Firms were very constrained and then just like threw themselves into this alternative source of financing, right? So in this paper, I investigated whether changes to the banking regulation lead to spur a bank lending substitute, trade credit, the definition that I just told you. My idea is that when trade credit was going up, bank lending was going down. When How? That's what I investigated in the paper. So I checked all the changes in the regulation. The banking sector was heavily regulated, like around 360 changes in the regulation in that decade of study that I just showed you in the graph. Of course, some changes to the regulation are very small, like very irrelevant, but some others are massive. So let me show you the next idea. So with this idea in mind, I was thinking, okay, so what do I expect that is going to be happening, right? My idea was the following. I expect that those regulatory changes to the banking regulation will be affecting first the banks, right? They are not supposed to be affecting the suppliers or the relationships between the firms, just the banks. So what I did here was, first, those regulatory changes that are tightening the constraints of the regulation immediately will scale back bank lending, right? The banks will not be providing money anymore. That's happening at the moment, right? The interest rates went up, the banks are scaling back, are being cautious. And that will simultaneously support trade credit because the loan demand of the firms will not be affected. So it's going to be increasing, right? I also was thinking, okay, the loosening of the constraints that will increase bank lending, different idea, right? And the loan supply will be increased. The idea of the trade credit is kicking in here, right? So I'm thinking, okay, so if I am a large firm and I have a better access to bank lending, then I will try to insert the money and I will give more loans to the small firms, right? The ones that are financially constrained. Indeed, after like checking tons of data, I found that yes, those regulatory shocks that are tightening the constraints will scale back bank lending and simultaneously support trade credit. And similar idea for the shocks that were loosening the constraints, right? They will increase bank lending and they will simultaneously support trade credit because of this, right? Firms with better access to bank lending, was they see their bank lending is increased, they will inject more lending in the shape of the trade credit. Okay. So the second research that I want to show you today and I want to tell you about is this idea that we talked about before. So I was telling you, yes, the firms are going to be constrained, right? Probably they are too small, so they cannot pledge a collateral because of their own nature, right? And also could be the case that the interest rates are high, which is the case at the moment, so the firms will not have enough money to pay the price for that lending, therefore they will not grow, then nothing is going on there. But there is a second idea that is in the literature, and it's a very interesting one. And I think it's, when I was preparing this presentation, I was thinking about you guys. I know this is a business school. The business school, at least here in Glasgow as well, is like gathering all the people that are very finance oriented, that are very like trying to create something like a fintech. We have several students here that are creating fintechs. So it's very cool to have young people that are willing to do something, right? Something that is giving like some contribution, is contributing to the economy. So the literature is telling the following. Yes, you have those firms that are going to be constrained, right? Because they cannot pay those interest rates, because they don't have the collateral, so they cannot pledge, then they cannot get the money. But you also have other group of firms, the firms that really don't want to grow, the firms that really don't care about that. And with this idea in mind, I decided to work on the second paper. So the paper, there are many, I don't know if you are familiarized with this, but in Europe, there are many institutions and many governments and central banks that are trying to incentivize the growth among micro and small enterprises. And one of those institutions decided to introduce this type of loan. So I landed in the PhD when this was starting. This paper that I'm telling you about is real, it happened. So the paper explores the introduction of a new type of loan that is exactly removing those constraints, right? Was granted without collaterals and was granted at a much, much lower interest rate, like 50% lower interest rate. The idea of this institution was to say, okay, so the firms are telling us that they are too small, so they cannot pay that huge price for the loans, and that they also don't have collaterals. And this is the reason of the lack of growth that they exhibit. So let's remove those constraints and let's see what are they going to do. Are they gonna be growing, or like they will simply not do anything and they are just lying to us? So that's the idea of the paper, to analyze whether this new type of loan is actually encouraging the owners of the small firms to grow, to have more employees, which is what we want, right? More sustainable financing, the banks get to know the person, they get more money, and the firm starts growing and growing, and the economy grows as well. So we don't have emerging countries anymore, so we are all developed. So that was the idea of the paper. But I was thinking, okay, so the companies are going to be growing, but which companies are going to be growing? Because not all the companies are the same. Is there like a specific trait that will help me to identify which companies, so I can report back to these central banks and tell them, okay, look, you want to give this type of loan to the medium and micro enterprises, so pay attention, because not all the firms are going to be growing. These firms with these specific traits, with this specific size, are the ones that you should be targeting, because those are the ones that are willing to grow, and ignore the rest. Could be the case. I didn't know when I started this, right? So with this idea in mind, and to try to identify the firms that were the ones that will be willing to grow, I found this paper by Levine and Rubinstein. And this paper is really, really interesting. If you can read it at some point, it's really, really good. So what they do is they have this exact idea, right? They want to identify the firms that are willing to grow. So after collecting data, like checking the models, they find the following. They find that the small companies, can be divided into groups. You have the entrepreneurs and the business owners. Those firms are small or micro enterprises, but those firms are completely different. The first group, the one that corresponds to the entrepreneurs, they gather all the information of those entrepreneurs since they were very young, about their families, their mother, their father, what they were doing, where they were living, which high school they went, which university, the grades, like ton of information to track those entrepreneurs over time. And I found that those entrepreneurs, who as teenagers score higher on learning aptitude tests, they exhibited greater self-esteem and engaged in more aggressive, illicit, and risk-taking activities with respect to their peers. So you have this in every cohort, right? The ones that are very smart but that don't study and they are like fighting and doing like crazy things. Those traits, those specific traits, were present among all those entrepreneurs. And they found that these traits are important when these entrepreneurs decided to start their life as an entrepreneur, and also when they created their companies. They also found some other things, right? They were highly educated, and they were also coming from families with two parents that were all salary workers. So that's on the one hand, that those are entrepreneurs. The business owners live on the other side of the spectrum. Those were not the smart ones. Those were not the ones involved in aggressive, illicit, and risk-taking activities. Those were exactly the opposite. And I found that those specific traits that they are showing before starting their life as business owners has an impact. So the idea here is that those true entrepreneurs, before they started their company, they came up with a plan. And based on that plan, they decided, or they chose between having an unincorporated or unincorporated business. And that had an effect because according to these plans, they shape many more decisions that came after. And all those decisions have an origin, which is those traits that they exhibited since they were younger. So with this idea, they say, okay, so we found that the true entrepreneurs will start their companies as limited liability companies, those limited liability companies, and the business owners will have companies that are in general unlimited liability companies. The first ones, entrepreneurs, are going to be very aggressive. They will be creating companies that are innovating, the fintechs. They will be creating companies that are growing. You have Google, you have Facebook, you have Amazon. They will create companies that are bringing something new, creating new market, not just companies that will create the same of the same, right? So I see like Starbucks and like Costa Cafe is exactly the same. There's no novelty there. There's nothing new. Starbucks is something new. It's like improving, creating new drinks. The other one is like the same drinks for the last 20 years. See the difference? So with this idea in mind, I decided to use that very same proxy to see whether this working paper was in fact true, whether this type of entity, the fact that the companies were established as limited liability companies, was the true proxy to identify the true entrepreneurs. So I created this, I was able to track this in the data, and I found the following. So when I analyzed the data, it went back. I found that this new law indeed has a positive impact on employment creation, but not for any firm, just for very, very small firms, less than 3 employees. When the firms are very big, there's not a positive impact. There's actually a negative effect on their employment. So they are not hiring more employees, they're actually reducing the size of the company. So after controlling for different elements such as the interest rate, I found that indeed it was the collateral, the main mechanism. It's not the interest rate, it's the collateral, the one that is allowing that positive effect on employment creation. So this is something new, right? Because it's telling you, okay, so the firms are complaining about the interest rates and the collaterals, but it's in fact the collateral, the one that is bringing growth to the economy. It's not the interest rate. And then when I analyze this proxy of Rubin and Rubinstein to identify the companies that are actually going to be growing once they get the loan, that are the companies that in fact should be getting the loan because they will be growing, I found that indeed those companies that were created as legal entities, limited liabilities, grew twice as much with respect to the companies that were proprietorships, which is in line with the research of Levine and Rubinstein, right? The true entrepreneurs are very specific. Not all the firms are going to be growing the same way. And there are specific traits on these owners that will allow and will inject more like energy to the firm. So this is a paper that I just submitted this week to the Journal of Banking and Finance. So I hope it gets accepted. I love the paper. So that comes with respect to the different traits that a contract can have. Now, I'm very much into all these alternative sources of financing. So at the moment, we have a research going on with one PhD student. She's from China. And we are working with shadow banking and fintech. So the university has a fintech program, and the coordinator of the program and me are teaming with this PhD student because we want to understand what's happening in China. You know, China is the nest of the fintech. The university also has like every couple of months seminars and invites fintechs in the UK to come and like to present their ideas. And many of those fintech owners are students from the university. So they are like 21, 22 years old, and they already owned a fintech. There are fintechs that are really, really important, and not all of them are connected with my research, right? So I just saw one that is about babies, right? So if you are about to get pregnant, the fintech is telling you where you should go, like to get like the things to avoid the stretch marks that you get when you're pregnant, which one is the cheapest according to the place in which you live, like the diet that you need, where are the places in which you find that food that is the cheapest. So it's very interesting. Once you have the baby, it's telling you, oh, this school is better for this and for that, but this is more expensive. So it's kind of guiding you the whole way on like when you are growing your kids. That was very interesting. Some other fintechs were connected with us, right? So they are acting as intermediaries between the banks and the unbanked people. Not all the fintechs work with firms. Some of them are working with people that need access to some sort of lending. So they go to the peer-to-peer lending, the crowdfunding, or these fintechs are connecting these people with banks so they can kind of relieve these moral hazard problems such that they can get a good loan at a good price. Now, for the case of this fintech project that we are conducting with this student, So I will show you the results of the initial results. She just started the PhD like a year ago, so we have been collecting the data. Do you know the fintechs are very reluctant to share their data, so we have to gather our own data, and that has been massively time consuming. So let's look at the definition for fintechs of the Central Bank of Ireland, right? Firms using new technology to compete with traditional financial methods in the delivery of financial services. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, cloud computing, and big data regarded as the ABCD of the fintech. So we're analyzing the impact of the different artificial intelligences that could help firms or that are affecting the firms in terms of the funds that they have available to pay the salaries of the employees, to pay like some like fixed costs, to pay or to like money that maybe they will invest in terms of the pension of the workers. So what we did is like we went to the annual statements of each one of those firms that are in the public firms in China, and then we look. Of course, it's like done with Python. But so we were like collecting the number of times that the word internet connected with something, artificial intelligence, digitalization, internet finance, big data, blockchain, fintech appear on their balance sheet to see or to get an idea of how important this is becoming for them. And you see, like this is not like a very, very accurate index, but we don't have information, so this is the best we can do. And you see the number of times that the word artificial intelligence and internet appears on the balance sheets has been increasing over time exponentially, right? It's not like slightly increase, is like a massive change. There are other words such as fintech and also internet finance that are also very important. So our idea now is like once that we got the data of the shadow banking, so we get to understand how firms in China are financing themselves in order to grow. But also we want to see which firms are growing faster, because that's in the end, oh, maybe it's just the use of fintech, the one that will produce the growth. Or maybe it's like fintech companies, only the ones that are going to be growing. We're trying to figure this thing out at the moment. But you get an idea of the importance. And I wanted to show you the graph of the shadow banking to have an idea of like the importance of this source of financing, but we are still working on it. It's planning process. It's gonna be ready soon. So I don't know if you have questions. I tried to share all this information with you like as fast as possible so I could answer everything, but I don't know if you have questions.
If anyone has any kind of doubt regarding today's sessions, can come forward and ask. What are the risks associated with automated finance? So my question is, what are the risks associated with alternative finance?
Sorry, come on, because I cannot hear.
Okay, so
well.
she's asking what are the risks which are associated with alternative financing options?
Very good. That's a very good question. And so the last week, I asked the very same question to the regulators that came. So the fintech in Scotland is also growing quite fast. And there is a big problem there, right? So you have all those firms that are being innovative, but they are all different, right? Some of the fintechs are just focused on like people that are having babies. Some of the fintechs are focused on giving money to the people that don't have access to the traditional channels, right? Don't have bank lending, so they need the money, they try to get it from somewhere. Now, the problem at the moment here in Scotland, and as it's in general a problem around the world, is that the fintechs are not sharing their data. And it's a bit the idea of the trade credit, right? They are not regulated, they are not monitored. but they are growing and they are growing fast. And they are also sharing their services to different countries. So I have seen fintechs in Mexico that are present in the UK, in Canada, in the US, in India, in China, and no one knows what are they doing. And they are gathering so much data that is getting very dangerous. So when you have an entity that is not being regulated and not monitored, you don't know what's going on. You don't know what they are doing. And this is something that happened that I happened to witness, and this is what I asked to the regulators last week. So there is one fintech that I attended because I wanted to know about like the different possibilities, and they are doing this. So imagine you would like to have a loan, right? You go to the bank, and the bank is telling you, I don't know your quality. I don't know if you're a good borrower, so no, I'm not giving you the money. Then you go to the fintech, and the fintech is like, oh, look, I can give you this loan or this loan or this loan at this interest rate. Which one would you like to have? Oh, this one. Oh, perfect. Then the fintech is acting as an intermediary with the bank, but the bank cannot see the quality of the borrower and cannot monitor the borrower because the fintech is acting as an intermediary. The fintech is not sharing the data and the information that this entity has from the borrower. And then the fintech is saying, okay, you bank, don't be worried, because if this person is not paying you your money back, I will do something. And this is what they are doing, and I don't agree with that. So they block your phone. Everything is connected through the phone. So you don't pay, immediately your phone is completely blocked. You cannot have a call, like, imagine you are like, I don't know, let's think about something very, very drastic. You are on the street and someone is attacking you and you need to make a phone call to the police. If you didn't pay back to the bank, the fintech is blocking your phone. So the phone is completely useless. No emergency calls, nothing. You cannot switch it on until you pay to the fintech, then you can use the phone again. And it's very dangerous, not only in terms of the risk that is creating, right? Because the phone was invented for a reason, right? To protect us in case we need to make a phone call, or like girls that are walking alone at night, they need to have the phones working, right? You cannot just have a phone that is not operating. But if the fintech has all this power to control your phone, that means that they are gathering more information as well, right? They have access to all the different apps that you have. If you have a bank app, they have access to that as well. And then to me, that seems that they are crossing the boundaries. But since now it's not regulated, no one is saying anything, right? So I asked the regulators, how are you dealing with this? And they were like, oh no, but that's happening around the world. Like TikTok gathers all the information. Yeah, but that's different because I will get the app of TikTok if I want to watch the videos. I don't have it because I don't want the people. I'm very conscious about this data, so I don't have apps in my phone. I remove everything. But if you want to watch the video, you get the app and you know that it's under your own risk that they will gather your data, right? But the situation of the people that really need the loan and they have to install that fintech app to get access to the money is different, right? They don't do that because they want to watch a video. They do that because they need the money for something. So to me, it seems that some of these fintechs are taking advantage of the needs or the financial needs of the people. And there is also another part. All the people that are in the fintechs, like the ones that are creating the fintechs, if you look at their CVs, you have engineers, you have like people that are doing computing, like sciences. You have people that is very well connected and has access to different like people or lending or funding. That's like a group of people that is highly educated. And the people that are in need of the use of those fintech to get money is exactly the opposite, right? People that probably have a job that is informal, that probably are not educated, highly likely that they are not educated, that they are in need. And you have those two groups interacting. These people don't know what is happening. I don't know if you saw the news, like it's coming all the time in the newspapers, like people that someone is calling and is telling, oh, install the app, and suddenly all their money is gone. savings like pensions completely gone because they install an app. See how like we have at the moment these two groups, like very, very highly skilled people in the fintech world and the rest of us on the other side. And then there's no regulation because at the moment this is all very new. Those fintech are not regulated. So we are all very exposed, and it's our own risk, right? We have to be monitoring at the moment because there are not real regulations. So that was a question. So they told me, yeah, like we need to evolve, but we cannot regulate that much because then the fintechs are not going to be innovative and there's not going to be growth. And there are really not many cases of people losing their jobs and their pensions. And I was like, well, if it was my pension, the whole sum lump of my pension, I would be very pissed if it was lost because someone installed an app, right? So this is a problem at the moment. I think it's the best moment in time for the fintechs to appear and to grow and become too big that it's going to be impossible to take them out. But it's also a risky moment, and we need to be very conscious about this. So that was the answer of the regulators. There's no regulation at the moment. We don't want to do it. We want the fintechs to be innovative. We need it because we are coming from COVID. So yeah, I am not happy with that. This is why we are working on the paper. We want to be regulating.
Hi, ma'am. I have one other doubt. So, maybe I will get a moment of silence. So, ma'am, I wanted to know, like you talked about entrepreneurial journey. So, like as a startup or from a starting point, we would prefer to do a bootstrap rather than going for a credit option, right? So, ma'am, I wanted to know how does of peer-to-peer lending and how does that framework work and what are the benefits which we can reap as a borrower or a lender?
Sorry, it's like my sound is like a bit blurry. So could you please repeat again?
So, as I was saying that we talked about entrepreneurial journey, right? So, as an entrepreneur for a startup, I would prefer to go for a bootstrap rather than going for a credit funding, right? So, I wanted to know that how does that peer-to-peer lending, that framework works, and what are the benefits that we can reap from a lender or a borrower?
Okay, so if I understood correctly, you want to know what are the benefits from using a peer-to-peer lending in terms of
Yes,
your.
so he's asking that he wants to go in for bootstrap funding as compared to credit lending. And I guess I'm right, Mukul.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Uh,
All right.
so what do you mean by credit lending? You mean bank lending?
Yes.
Okay. So you have already noticed the idea of this peer-to-peer lending, and this is kind of the reasons why they appear. So if you go to the bank, they will be doing, like they will check the quality of your what's the name? Your credit score is in the UK, so they will check all the loans that you have, and they will make sure that you pay. So if you didn't pay, they will produce some sort of ranking, and they pass this to the bank, and the bank says, okay, this is a risky borrower. Let's charge more interest rate, or let's ask for a collateral. It depends also on the amount of money that you have, right? So those are kind of the indicators that the banks get, and they consider in order for you to get that specific amount of money. And it's not something that you just can avoid, right? Every time you go to the bank, they will check the quality of your payments, they will check how good you are as a borrower, and then they will create a contract. But in general, if you don't have a previous relationship, the contract will be charging you a huge interest rate or a huge collateral. In the case of the peer-to-peer lending that appeared like some years ago, and that's kind of the different idea, right? Because you don't have it's not like you will have to pledge some collateral. You don't have, probably you will have some sort of cost that is already implicit in the amount of lending that you will get. But this figure of the collateral, the peer persecuting you and taking your collateral in case you are not paying is not really there, right? So this is one of the many advantages of these new sources of financing. The peer-to-peer lending is not going to be considering that, like we'll tell you, oh, now I'm going to be checking the quality of your payments and I will see how good you are. Those are a bit softer, but also the loan amounts are not that high. It's not that you will be getting a huge amount of money if you go to a bank and the bank doesn't know you, right? But the banks have more resources. So it's a bit like a difficult situation because the optimal way will be to get like some sort of lending that comes at a very reduced price without the collateral, right? That's what I would like to have. That you can get if you go to the peer-to-peer lending. Whereas if you go to the traditional banking sector, you have to pass through the different filters. So I think it's a matter of first checking who are you, or if you have a company, what's the position of your company. So if it's a very young company, probably you will be punished heavily. If you don't have a previous relationship with the bank, you will be punished heavily. I don't know if you saw at the beginning of this year, it appeared in the Financial Times. So there is a multinational corporation that decided that wanted to improve its facilities. So the company said, okay, banks, look at me. I'm a multinational. I'm very successful, and I would like to go green 100%. So all the like zero emissions, I'm going to do that, but help me. And the bank said, okay, this is a multinational corporation, right? So 15 banks in the US got together and created a loan that is called a syndicated loan. And this is just so you have the idea of the importance of having the relationship with the bank. The companies came together, the banks, they joined their efforts, and the risk of this company that is massive because that loan was gigantic was spread across 15 banks in the US. The amount of lending is gigantic. The interest rate is ridiculously low, like almost 0%. And the collateral that they were pledging was like, you will not believe this, probably it's like the flat in which the janitor is living. That was a collateral that pledged. And they are basically using the reputation, their size, the potential earnings to show the bank their quality, to signal that they are good borrowers. And then they got this massive loan that is pretty much coming for free. Why? Because this company already was engaged with these banks for several years. It's a good borrower. They know the company. It's known around the world. It's a strong company. And the bank said, like, this is a good deal. Let's just get engaged. It's going to be good for us as well. Whereas if you are a small company, the bank is going to be like, meh, too small, too risky, is not going to be paying. Let's charge more. If this company is so small and it doesn't want to pay the money, I will get other ones. That's the problem with the small company. So the decision in terms of whether to use one source of financing or the other really depends on you, on your quality. Are you very young? Are you very small? Are you very risky? Are you starting a project that is too risky? Because the banks will check what is the purpose of that money? What are you going to be doing? Sometimes they just don't check, but then we'll ask for balance sheets, and the small companies don't have those ones. So that in those cases, in most of the cases, these companies cannot really choose between the bank lending and alternative sources of financing. They will just simply go and get the peer-to-peer lending or use another like supplier lending or fintech, simply because this access is not there. So my suggestion, if you want to choose, and if you are able to choose, go to the peer-to-peer lending is better. At least the collateral is safe. You don't have to pledge it. If you're a gigantic firm like this multinational, go to bank lending, you will get almost 0% interest rate and you will have to pledge nothing to get the money. But those are different energies that are like playing in your favor and against you. So it's like a very, very, very difficult decision, you really need to consider who's the person, who's the entity, and what's the quality of the entity that is asking for the money in order for you to make a decision. I don't know if I answered your question.
Right. It was very well answered, Dr. Diana. So I guess because of the paucity of time, we wouldn't be able to take up much questions, although a lot of students wanted to ask questions from you. But I guess we've already crossed the time limit. Thank you so much for such an enlightening session. I would request Aditi to please take over.
Sure.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much. I hope I help you. Have a good afternoon. And if you have questions later, you can just email me.
Yeah, sure. I'll do the needful, and I'll coordinate with you over email, Dr. Diana, or over WhatsApp.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm certain that the learning from this session will allow us to build our competencies in skill sets relevant to the world of work and definitely give us an edge in the journey of becoming professionals of tomorrow. This was indeed an elevating webinar. I would like to thank our section expert for its amazing learning experience. Thank you everyone for being a great audience. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Diana.
Thank you. See
Yeah,
you.
thank you. See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.